Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. I'm doing a little retreat for myself up in the mountains of British Columbia here. So I have a nice little river spot, got a fire pit, and it's around Christmas time, so no snow yet, but it's getting colder and colder. So we should have some snow soon. Okay, so in today's episode, we are going to continue with our exploration of Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics, and we'll be looking today at step 5. So, the first part of this step is with the mental training, the training of the spirit, and this is an introduction or an exploration, a technique to bring us into resonance with the Akasha principle. So, what is the Akasha? You hear myself and many others talk about Akasha. So what is it? Well, it's a very difficult thing to pin down because it is, well, that's why I call it the Akashic paradox, is that it is the bridge between form and formless, both the bridge and of form and of the formless. So it is the space in which there is form, in which there is formlessness, the bridge between, and it is all-encompassing and all-penetrative. And defining characteristics being all-encompassing, all-penetrative, free of the tensions of time and free of the tensions of space. So in the first step, or first portion I should say, of this Akashic training, it's a mental training exercise that involves the collapsing of the mind, right? Now, this is the collapsing of the mind to the point of the particle, right? To go so small that eventually it disappears. Now, this is often something that is experienced through basic samadhi type training if you're doing more regular types of meditation. And that's how I first experienced this Akashic quality, was through single-pointed focus training. And it was in Anapana-styled meditation. The object of meditation was the point just here. And what started happening very naturally for me was that point started getting smaller. As my awareness grew, that point of awareness could become more and more refined and more refined and more refined. So that reference point of stillness, of centeredness, became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the entirety of the body disappeared, and all that existed was this infinitely minute reference point, right? Now, Bardon calls this the depth point, right? This is the center of the center of the center of the center. And it's much more than the center of space of the object. And that's how it's first explored, is the center of space. So in the beginning, he has, if you have a ball, right, or a cube, or a triangle, or some various simple shapes, some dice he suggests as well, where you mentally transfer into the object and then condense yourself into the center, and you shrink yourself until you are so small that the object that you are occupying appears as vast as the universe. And this is, once again, there's a lot of value here. Now, the freedom of mind to allow for that spacelessness to occur is pretty stupendous. So if the mind is locked in to shape and the physiology is locked in to shape, then what happens is we can't really do it. It hurts, right? So I actually found that this particular exercise, while it is how I initially touched into the Akasha through my own training, the next exercise that you do for Akasha in, I believe, step 6, I found to be an easier first step for me, and that it opened up the Akasha more easily. Now, once the Akasha is open to you and then you come back to this, then it's incredibly easy because you're very much not bound by the tensions of space and time. So we really need to free ourselves of those, and this is one doorway in. If it's hard and you can't do it, doesn't mean you can't find the Akasha. It just means that this doorway might not be the most effective for you. So you start with objects, and then he has us go to trees and animals and, moving objects. Of course, you can do it with anything. Symmetrical, starting, and then asymmetrical. Once you have asymmetrical, then you can move into life, right? Plant life, tree life, nature, right? You can explore the elements. You can light a fire, right? You can work with water. The elements are weird when you start working with fire, air, water, and earth. But you could take, say, a stone, right? Maybe you have, I really like lapis lazuli. Maybe there's a stone that you like to work with, and you can transfer into the stone and start to learn about earth magic through transferring in. And then, of course, people being the second last one, and then finally yourself in this step. So transferring into your own depth point, your own Akasha. And this is usually the Akasha that most of us tap into first, is the Akasha of ourselves. Essentially, our Akashic spirit, our Akashic consciousness. The thing beneath the thing that we think of as this, right? So to do this, Bardon recommends you go into the solar plexus. Now, as I mentioned, when I first found this Akashic state, it was through Anapana meditation. So the actual location three-dimensionally of the center isn't necessarily something that we have to use, right? It is just a doorway, right? Anything is a doorway to everything. And Akasha, being all-encompassing, means that anything is a doorway, is the center of everything, right? Now, to use the solar plexus, this is very interesting because we have it in the center between the electric and magnetic if we're using Bardon's astral training, right? In terms of loading the elements into the body, this would be the empty point. So there's a lot of stuff you can learn that's quite valuable out of using this for the Akasha. Now, if we can tap into our personal Akasha, then we can tap into, eventually, the universal Akasha. Our personal Akasha can become the center or the depth point of universal Akasha. But we need to explore this. So let's say we use the idea of a reference point. When we're playing with reference points, the idea is that the more refined the reference point becomes, the more you can observe that which is, in the beginning, perceived as moving around the stillness of the reference point, right? So the more still the point of reference becomes, the more minute the point of reference becomes. Again, that shrinking of the perspective atomically until it disappears, right? The more minute it becomes, the more you can see the movement in subtle layers that appeared still. So in the beginning when you're meditating, let's say you're using like Anapana meditation, you focus there and you start to notice as the mind stabilizes there that there's all this mental activity, all this astral activity, all this physical activity, this movement that's occurring. And then that movement starts to still as that stillness of your reference point, that stability, begins to permeate through the mind. The mental layers permeate through the astral layers and permeate through the physical layers. Then what happens is our awareness improves and our reference point shrinks. It becomes more refined, which means what seemed still, now from there suddenly we perceive so much more movement. And then you go through that process of mental, astral, and physical coming into resonance with greater stillness. Then you improve and you go, oh no, I'm so terrible because there's all this movement happening, and the process continues. Now, another way to look at this is that all of the stuff that is moving is actually locked. It's locked within the tensions and perspectives of time, and locked within the tensions and perspectives of space, right? And that what actually allows for stillness is the freedom of those. So suddenly that stuff is able to ebb and flow, and the perspective itself becomes the stillness, right? The perspective itself, the emptiness itself, the perspective becomes emptiness. The perspective becomes the depth point. The perspective becomes akasha. And once that is the case, then we are not trying to lock down a stillness. Stillness and emptiness becomes the place from which everything is viewed. And all of the stuff, right, the phenomena, is merely that. And it is not robbing you in any way of your connection to stillness or to akasha. So, as we begin to explore the akasha of ourselves, we find that suddenly, because we can exist from that space of akasha, from that space of freedom, our own akasha, everything else suddenly we have an incredible amount of agency over, because we are not identifying with the phenomena. We're not identifying with the form or the particle. We are identifying from a wave. And this is where we get this really interesting transition. Again, we want to obviously include both, but we work through these different identity fractals as we're growing, and the perspective is constantly evolving. So we there's always duality, and then we evolve, and suddenly we can perceive the duality from within its space that they both reside, and then that space tends to be one of another set of duality, and then we see and grow and evolve and expand to the bigger space. So anyways, just something to think about. Now, because we aren't identifying with the phenomena, we're working with the akasha. The phenomena is not locked in place, which means our ability to work with phenomena drastically improves, right? This is where the power of the akasha starts to come in to the picture, right? And if you can touch the akasha of yourself, the akasha of a tree, you can start to perceive and work with the energies so much more efficiently, because you're not in a state of fight. It's not form versus form, right? You are actually working with the thing itself. Now, there's layers to akasha. There's layers to emptiness, right? And there's whole vast spectrums and different kinds of akasha. In the beginning, this is explored a little bit with the Kabbalistic letter magic and different flavors of akasha. But it's truly infinite, as again, it is all of the stuff, all encompassing, all penetrating. So the consciousness to the Akasha, as the consciousness is timeless and spaceless, can work through both, can penetrate, right, to the very depths of anything, can expand. So as we work with the mental transference skills, the transfer of consciousness skills, you start to work with your Akasha. And as you begin exploring from behind what it is you're working on, you start to come into resonance consciously with your Akasha. So this first exercise, again, it is to find the depth point or the center point. And then beyond the center point, you shrink so small to the point that anything that you're observing, right, becomes the size of the universe. If you shrink into your solar plexus and you're doing this and breaking through into the Akasha, if you want, you can penetrate to such a refined point of nothingness there that your body seems to be that of the universe. Your microcosm suddenly is the macrocosm. And this opens many, many doors once the macrocosm is the macrocosm and the microcosm, and both fall in and out of themselves. So this is a technique. Let's make this clear. This is only a technique, one of many techniques that can open the doorway to experiencing the Akasha. Okay, so if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, it might be that some other explorations and exercises for the Akasha can be done first, and then once those have been done and you have a connection to the Akasha, then you can go back to this exercise and suddenly it's very easy. One thing that is sort of missing in this text is some longer duration meditative like workups, right? You can look at lots of different meditations where during the course of a meditation, maybe you're going to meditate for a couple of hours, you start laying the foundation from an energetic standpoint, and then over the course of that time, you build the qualities into existence, so that when you get to more advanced exercises towards the end of that longer meditation, all the preparation's done, and it's easy to enter the space that you need to for whatever is for you at this time a more advanced stage or through path that you want to explore with your current level of meditative skills. So there is value in that, and you can explore building your own amalgamation of spherical, spiralesque sort of meditation where you work through the foundation and you grow. By the end of the meditation, you're hitting a real refined point for you. You do the newest, most advanced exercise that you're currently working on. Doesn't have to be the newest or the most advanced, but you get the idea. Build the foundation just like you do in a whole system. Build the foundation even within a singular meditation session, and it can greatly improve the depth you can go. So anyway, anything else there? Nope, that pretty much covers this initial introduction to Akasha. So now moving on to the schooling of the soul, the astral training for step 5. So in the schooling of the soul, the astral training for step 5 here, we have a further exploration of the elements. Now, one thing that we start exploring here, and that Bardon makes a very good point about, is the resiliency that we're building when developing the elements. So this is referenced as the tensions in association with each of the elements. So there is a type of tension, a personality to how the fascia responds when it's filled with each element. right? The energy itself, like we looked at with the vital energy, with the life force, it causes an expansion of the tissue. And so fire element has a certain flavor in which it orchestrates its way through the body. And there is a type of stretch that occurs with each of the elements, and we are building a resiliency in the astral body to the elements as we work on them. So the first portion of this particular step and exercise is filling the body with the element and then expelling it from the body, initially from the solar plexus, or from, you can fill it with just the hands. There's a bunch of different techniques that he uses. And the idea is, once you've expelled the fire element into the room, instead of back to the universe, you fill the room, say, with the fire element, you should be able to feel the heat in the room. And anyone who, you're training with, if you're doing meditations with a group and you fill the room with fire element, everyone starts to get hot, and that electric energy starts to permeate the room. Now, what's so cool about this particular step and the astral training is it offers a bunch of different variations on how you can explore and play with the elements. One of the biggest values in having so many options is that you can have a lot of fun just exploring. And because you're having fun exploring, you will tend to do more practice, which means the relationship that you cultivate with each of the elements grows. So you build each of the elements into the body, and you feel that particular personality of the pressure of that type of element, right? Whether it's heat or cold, expansiveness, cohesiveness, density and heaviness, or lightness and porousness, whatever it might be, you then fill that into the room. And because you expel it from your body in the first portion, that means that there will be a difference between the fire element outside of your body and the fire element inside, which means you will be able to perceive it as it touches the outside. You'll feel the heat. If you are equalized with the energy, then there is virtually no perception of it. And this is one of the reasons it's so hard to recognize when we are in unification with whatever energy we're working with, is because there's virtually no feedback, right? Because you're in union with it. So it is a difference that allows us to perceive. I just finished quite a few hours, end of the day, of a bunch of pretty deep practice, and my mouth is still trying to figure out how to speak, so bear with me. It is difference that allows us to perceive. Differentiation is the key to perception and to cognitive learning. In the absence of differentiation, when we have reached a stage of unity or unification and equalization with the frequency we're working with, the perception of that frequency dissolves, because we, us, I, and that thing are the same. Okay? So, that's the first part of this particular step. And then, to further the astral training, of course, you do this with each of the elements, and if you work on each element every day, you build the type of resiliency to the elements astrally. And this can have very profound effects health-wise, in terms of your emotional resilience, your health resilience, your mental resilience. And that's one of the reasons it's so important. So into the body and then out of the solar plexus, you can, anything's fair game here, right? These are all techniques just to get you acquainted with potentials and options. As you start becoming more and more familiar with the elements and the energy, what happens is all of these things, right? It's not about doing a technique for a result. You do the result, right? And whatever the technique that has to be there, it will sort of manufacture itself and then it'll dissolve away. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind and sort of keep on the back burner as you keep going through this process. Then you have the building of the element into the body and then expressing it through, say, the fingertips or the hands, or building the elements just into the hands and the fingertips, all that pressure, all that energy, and then out, right? And that's a fun one to explore and play with. Any part of the body can be used. The reason the hands and fingers are so good is because that's where a lot of mudra rituals exist. So potentially a lot of value there, depending on what your interests are. Now, there's a fun thing that he does here where he takes the element, and whichever one, and he builds it into the body and then forms, say, in the solar plexus, a shape. Let's say, we'll use the platonic solids, for example. Maybe you form the tetrahedron with the fire element, and then you expel the tetrahedron and all that fire element which has been loaded into the tetrahedron out, and you hold it in space in front of you. And if you were, he uses a sphere in the beginning, so sphere is easiest. I use this particular type of practice to help people understand mental training and how shape informs function, how form informs function, so that you can start to learn how the particular ways in which you use the mind and which you shape the energy actually has an effect, even if it's of the same element. So, what's cool, let's say you take that tetrahedron or a sphere and you bring that out in front of you. If you reach out, you should be able to feel the heat, or feel the water element, or feel the air, the lightness, feel the earth in that particular location, that your mind is holding the element, the information, the quality of energy in that particular space. So the value in this is, it doesn't need to be stated. It is incredible for any type of use case scenario that you might be working with, where you're holding the energy outside of the body and doing something with it, making sure it holds an element. So one thing I used to do when I was playing with this is I would fill the room with the energy, the element, and then I would envision, at the time I was very into martial arts and the sort of push handsy side of the Tai Chi stuff, and the partner work of like actual martial arts and stuff. So I would envision a partner or an opponent, and then I would work the energy around them in the element, and then I would envision the particular usage of the element in relation to moving them around. So if it was fire element, it would have a fire feeling to it. If it was water, it would have that watery suction, cohesive quality, pulling them around, wrapping them up in the waters. If it was air and earth, of course, different qualities there as well. So that was one way that I used to enjoy exploring this back in the day. So once you've done it from the solar plexus, then of course he does it from infinity, say just into the room without it passing through the body. Or from, again, infinity, the universe, into a shape without it having to pass through the body first. And this has incredible value. Now, why is that? Because you don't need to strain your system, right, through the energy conducting through your system for it to function, right? And a lot of people have a very difficult time transitioning to this because your feedback mechanism, the energy running through yourself being your feedback mechanism for what's happening outside yourself, you're not using that anymore. So it's very, very tricky to have feedback, which means your trial and error, your faith in what you're doing, the repetition in which you have had very successful results, that starts to matter. And your faith in what you're doing and in the efficacy of all of the successful experiences you've had doing this. That gets tested because you don't have yourself as the feedback mechanism, right? Now, the same thing can happen when you're unified with an energy, but that's probably for another time. So when you're taking the energy from the universe, say fire element, again, condense it into a sphere or whatever shape you want in front of you, and then you feel that, okay? And lots of people prefer using it through the body because you have that feedback mechanism. When you get used to doing it from the universe into a shape in front of you, it starts to open up doorways where space becomes a little bit more irrelevant to the practice that you're doing. If you're going to do long distance healing or transmission, if it has to come through your body, I mean, you can still use the body because, again, space becomes irrelevant. You can still use yourself as a feedback mechanism, but your faith in what you're doing in terms of the energy actually affecting somebody else across the globe is the exact same it's the same function as when you bring it from the universe into a shape in front of you. So fun ways to play with this, if you have like a partner who's working on this stuff too, you can sort of pass different energetic shapes back and forth and see what you observe. You could pass different elements back and forth, just like a ball, like you would toss a ball back and forth, right? And like, you feel, the earth element. You transform it into the air, pass it back. Whoa, it feels like the air element. You turn it into fire. So you start to play with this stuff, and that's a very simple exercise. You can make this much more complicated, as I was mentioning, with like working on particular attributes with martial arts, or if you're a musician, you can play the elements into the room, right? The sound becomes like a type of carrier, right? Just like the energy itself. So that's another way to do it, is you could work an element and you could envision the playing out of the attributes of that element into a room or into a person, into an individual person. When I used to play a lot of drums, back when I was doing a lot of music, I would pick a person in the room who maybe they weren't like grooving with the beat or whatever, and I would take the feeling of that pulse and I would send it out to that person and see if I could get them chicken necking with the music. So the use functions are everywhere, and it's up to you to start exploring them. So we really need to make sure when we're working with the elements that we keep cultivating our strength and our resiliency to more and more element, whatever one it is, because that will keep us functioning in a more balanced and healthy way. So he offers up at the end of this particular section a few different sort of magical, you might call them like party tricks, but practical use functions if you really develop the skill a lot. Making fire with the fire element, changing the flavors of water, and then if you take those skills to a high degree, then you have some quite phenomenal functions. Air element, things like cloud bursting. Just did that a couple minutes ago, was playing around, and if you can open up and diffuse energy and you can hold your mind in an area and work the energy, then you can start having an effect. So at higher levels, there's more intense weather magic, cloud bursting being probably fairly low level on that front, because it doesn't take too much, and it was a small cloud and it was floating along. So he offers some things to play with, and as always, the suggestion that if you want to work and develop these phenomenal expressions of power, it's going to take all your time, and that you will be lacking in the equanimity of your development, in the equilibrium, and that your cultivation, your development as an individual, as a spiritual entity, that will start to degrade because you have to put so much time into bringing this one manifestation of a certain type of power into being. So he is often suggesting that, right? That you keep your training balanced, your practice balanced. So this is a really fun step with this astral training, and there's a lot you can do with it. Now, he's always saying, do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, in terms of each exercise within each step. And is the value to that? Sure. But all of these techniques are, once again, they're just techniques. Okay? And so is there value in bringing the energy into the body so you know it's there because you're so used to that, then expressing it out? Yeah, absolutely. And then working the other stage? Yeah, absolutely. There's always value to all of it. But it is, once again, techniques. The purpose of what you're doing is important, right? The purpose, the use function of the energy. The technique then starts to modulate itself. So even recently in the last workshop that I taught, we were doing this retreat, and I almost never get these sick things where you're coughing and all snotty and blowing your nose all the time. But literally the day or two before I was teaching this week-long retreat, that came in super hard, and I was modulating the energy so it wasn't too big a deal, but those things were there, and I had no energy because it was being used to harmonize this thing and to fight off whatever was there. Which means that I couldn't, there was no energy for me to stress and stretch that energy through myself, to use myself as a feedback mechanism. I didn't have it in me to run the energy and conduct it through me. So it really brought home the importance of the infinity into the room, and not using myself as the barometer for the success of what's happening in the group. And not needing to run that energy through me because I just didn't have it. Didn't have it there. So as an example of how your use case and the moment, the intricacies of the moment will dictate what it is that you do and how it is that you do it. Because you have to change. You have to adapt, right? For everything to occur the way that we want it to occur, right? So anyway, lots of fun stuff in this astral training for this step 5, and let's move on now to the schooling of the body. So step 5, the schooling of the physical body. This step begins with essentially a life force type of training, and it starts with laying your hand on a table, filling the let's say your hand or your finger with energy, and then using the indications of the mind, the commands of the mind, to raise the finger, each finger individually, to raise the hand off the table, to raise the forearm, and then the whole arm off the table. Now, you could probably connect this exercise in with step 3. It's sort of a takeoff on that when you're building all that vital energy. And if you remember in step 3, you build that vital energy and the body fills with the energy, right? You feel the pressure, the expansiveness through the tissue and beyond, radiating out through the field. Now, once we've built this energy, the vital energy can act as a type of translator, right? And then through that translator, the commands of the mind, the wishes of the mind, the suggestions of the mind can start to indicate motion and actually manifest the motion. So anyone who's done a lot of, say, Tai Chi work and the like, you'll notice that when you begin, you're moving the physical body, but over time, as you start to fill with energy and as you start to connect through various harmonization functions, that very, very subtle, almost non-existent movements of the mind will begin to formulate shifts and changes in the flow of energy. And as a result, the physical body will start to move and form in very refined ways the intricacies of what we might think of as a posture of the form, right? These sort of moments in time and space, these slices of time and space. So anyway, in this first part of the step, you're really working the body. And I think one of the common pitfalls with people who are working through this book, The Initiation into Hermetics, is that we look at words or instructions like use the will to move the body, and we view it from the perspective of where we're currently at in our spiritual evolution. So what I mean by that is that whatever density your will currently exists at, that is what we think the instruction refers to. I'm going to use my current density of will to do this thing. Now, as we develop and keep on that spiritual path of ascension, the will, what it is, evolves. It changes. It becomes less dense. So over time, it becomes more and more akashic, and it starts to resonate more and more with your akasha, and then from there, it takes off again. So we need to be aware of that. Now, for those of you who have very refined body awareness, maybe you've done a lot of body-based practices or stillness practices where your aim is to still the body totally and completely. You'll find, of course, when you're doing those types of practices that you gain a very high awareness of all of the minutiae, the little tiny movements that are taking place. Those of you that are in that category, you might find this peculiar, where you fill with energy, of course, that's the first step, and then you use the will to move. And the instruction is, well, it's not the part of you that normally moves that creates the movement. So someone who's very aware will go, oh, but no, there's still a part of me that's moving. I can feel that. It's not as if the hand is lifting of its own accord, or the finger is lifting of its own accord, or the arms are lifting of their own accord. And that is because there's so much refinement to the awareness. And so if you're in that camp, the quantity of energy that you load in needs to really, really be brought up so that you can back off the intensity of the command with the mind and allow for this new type of motion and movement to occur. The way that movement occurs when you're working in this way, it's far different. The place from which motion is activated is far different than the normal movement functions of our typical motions in the body. So we need to allow for that growth to occur, right? Now, this is I think he recommends the air element for this as well. So a wonderful way to work the air element, and you can start to explore this once you get a little better at it and more familiar with it. You can start adding resistance to it. As we've mentioned, you increase complexity to the activity, to your relationship with the energy once you become familiar with it. So the first way that you can do that, or a way you can do that, is to add a little bit of weight. Maybe it's the weight of a little cup, right? A little mug or something. A pound, half a kilogram, something small. And you see if you can fill with energy, tap into the air element, and essentially levitate, have the arm levitate up while you are holding that weight. And over time, you can add more and more weight. You can, of course, go for hikes, throw weights in a backpack, fill your whole body with the air element. Oh, interesting. And observe how things lighten as you work through the exercise. These are very easy ways that you can start to explore this. Now, where we tend to fall short here is when we put more emphasis and importance on the quantity of weight being moved, right? And less importance on the process and relationship to the energy through which we are moving the weight. So the process, that relationship to the energy, to the mind, the relationship of mind, energy, and body, that is the most important part. So you can, of course, emphasize the quantity of the weight and in the beginning, and that will detract from the quality, but it will build a coarse type of relationship, and then you can refine that over time and sort of bridge the gap between heavy weights, not super amazing process and quality, and light weights or almost no weights, really good process and quality, and slowly bridge those two, and then you can take them both back up, right? So lots of ways to explore this. Bardon just looks at the initial movements there. This essentially is a very introductory training to what they would say in Tai Chi, mind moves Qi, Qi moves body. And so that is what you are working on in this first portion of the schooling of the physical body in step 5. Now, the second portion is almost in polar opposition to the first, right? And by that, what we're doing is we are actually moving the mind or the energy outside of the body. So the initial instruction is to place the hand on a table and then pass the mental mind or the spirit mind of the hand, the spirit body of the hand, right? Or we could say the mental body of the hand, because he uses spirit often to refer to activities of the mental body and the mental mind. Now, he also uses in the I think within a couple sentences here, the astral hand, the spirit hand, and these are different. These are all different things, or can be different things, depending on what you want to connect them to, right? You could use the word spirit to refer more to the light body of the hand, right? You could use, he's using often spirit to refer to the mental body of the hand. Now, if all these things seem like, it's just different words, the same stuff, it could be, certainly, but also it cannot be. It depends on the perceptions of the practitioner and what particular energetic relationships, right, and body relationships are being applied. So words do matter, especially when you are referring to specific things with those words, or specific qualities and perceptions. So, with that being said, you place your hand on a table and you pass your, we'll use his words, your spirit hand out through the table and let it rest on your thigh. So the physical hand doesn't move. And the will, in a sense, is beyond the physical hand in connection with your spirit hand on your thigh. And you feel as if you're touching your thigh. Now, this is preparation for mediumistic type of training, which is what we get to in the rest of this step. But before we do that, we need to look at that actual passage through. Now, in the first part of the step, and if you're used to doing a lot of energy work where it moves the body, that mind moves energy, energy moves body, when you go to pass, we'll just say for the moment, the mind out of the hand and down through the table, you'll feel a pulling of the tissue, right? All the tissue will pull as the energy pulls and follows the movement of the mind. And the pressure of the hand against the table might even increase, and there'll be the typical responses to the movement of the mind and how the body responds to that. If you've tied together very strongly, mind moves energy, energy moves body in a particular way. Okay? Now, with this, we want almost the opposite, where there is no connection between mind and body. The mind leaves the body and rests on the thigh, right? Now, this is something that, if you are not used to it, can be very, very tricky. Okay, the mental hand is leaving the body. What results is that the hand that's there, that's left there, it's almost like it doesn't exist, right? It's almost like it's been given over to the Akasha. And that's one of the things that's so bamboozling for people about the Akasha, is that it's as if you aren't there, right? So in this sense, we are identifying with the mental hand, and it moves down and out of the body. Okay, so there's a lot of value in exploring this. Can you separate the mind from the hand, right, and allow it to rest on the thigh? And what is that like? Is there any perception left in the hand? What's going on there? If you have very developed body awareness, in the beginning it can be very difficult to make this separation because you're always identifying with the body. And this is one of the potential things you really gotta be wary of if you're involved in a very dogmatic embodiment practice, is that you can lock yourself into the prison of the body, right? And it's very difficult for the mind to break free of that. So this exercise is a way in which you can begin practicing that. Okay, it's also the beginnings of mental wandering and, a bunch of other types of skill sets that start to arise. So what does it feel like? What's the difference? Get used to this, play with it, explore it. It's very, very interesting. And then do it right before it. Try the first version, which is the filling with energy and using the mind to move the body, to move the energy, right? And then switch, and you'll get a very interesting understanding of the dichotomy. Okay, so then Bardon starts introducing potential mediumistic methods using pendulums, and you essentially you hold the pendulum, but you leave you take the mind out of the hand so that your spirit hand is moving the pendulum, right, instead of the physical hand. Now, once again, if you have very refined body awareness, it can be very difficult for the physical hand to be doing nothing. And I've noticed every time I go to do pendulum work, if I'm very still, there's no movement in the pendulum. So very often, these types of Ouija board-esque explorations, pendulum-esque explorations, these are indications of subconscious movements, unconscious, subconscious movements in the body, and how the energy and body patterns move in very, very subtle ways. And Bardon uses this initially to start exploring a potential connection with spirit guides and these types of beings and intelligences that exist outside the body. And for the mediumistic training in this last part of step 5, the most important part of the mediumistic training, as indicated by Bardon, is simply to indicate to the pathwalker that there is communication that exists beyond what we might typically consider communication, right? Now, where I don't particularly enjoy this style of mediumistic exploration, I find it's very reduced. Even though there's lots of ways to try to increase the complexity, I've never found it's been something that I've enjoyed doing very much. Now, where I did use this type of thing a lot is with buying supplements and food and essentially getting a yes-no, a very basic yes-no response from the subconscious. Okay, now I'm using the subconscious here instead of the spirit guide because with these types of exercises, I've never experienced anything that is beyond the subconscious in terms of the resonating experience. So if I'm going to reach out and test a supplement, it's the same as muscle testing where, you weak, strong, or, people do this type of stuff, weak, strong. And I got to a point where I can feel the resonance, the life, the expansive life resonance, or the depleting, deadening. And so those were the two responses that I would use. And those were quite effective for me. Now, you can also look at this as that is the vehicle, the mechanism through which your spirit guide might be acting. So I find for connecting with other entities, you really do have to be out of yourself to allow for that stuff to come through. And there can't be any predetermined outcomes or desires for, you touch the chocolate ice cream or whatever it is and you go, oh yeah, no, it feels good. It's like, okay, well, maybe, it's certainly possible, but it's also more likely that it's probably not. So what I found with a lot of this pendulum stuff is that subconscious desires might come out over the actual communication. So anyway, you can explore this stuff as much as you want. I don't find the mediumistic stuff to be of interest really, but it does pave the way for further work when you start doing invocation and evocation. The reason that I find this to be reductive, a lot of the stuff in the step, is that you're putting these parameters down and then trying to impose on a being that exists beyond the confines of the corporeal flesh, very limited ways in which it can communicate. When we allow this communication to run through us in more of the invocative type of methods, then the types of communication and integration and change can be so much further beyond what our intellect can understand, right? Whereas in these methods, you're reducing the potential communication to reflect through the intellect, right? So my preference is to allow everything to reflect beyond the intellect so that the mass quality, the qualitative changes that can occur are beyond comprehension. And for evolution, on our spiritual path, we are always moving to a layer that is beyond our current comprehension. That causes the breaking and opening of the mind to further expanse and further connection and deeper unification in more integral and expansive ways. And this is, where Bardon looks at in this step, at least step 5, using the all-penetrating nature of the Akasha and an exercise to the all-penetrating nature of the Akasha as a doorway to it, right? Now, of course, there's other doorways, but it's one that's very valuable. So anyway, two totally opposing schoolings of the physical body. One is fill the body with energy, use mind to move energy, to move body. The other is, so that is integrating mind, energy, body. The other is disintegrating or separating it by using the methods we discussed. And feel free to read further in the book there. Okay, I think that's it for this step 5. I hope you enjoyed this and are enjoying this series. Please share if you found it valuable. I think the sharing hits the algorithms pretty good. If you're interested in training with me, I have some online courses in Tai Chi and Qi Gong, Hermetic magic, and higher levels of meditation. On the online website, which all websites are, we also have the Zen Den, which is a Q&A video reference library. So any questions you have with the programs or course content, I put very, very detailed answers up there. And there's also a lot of more advanced meditations up there. And there's a lot of videos on there. So you can enjoy that. Take a look there. For in-person training, I have online video calls that we do. So we do private coaching via video call, and also I have a retreat coming up in June 2025. So if you're watching this before that, check out the details in the description there and on the website. If you're watching after, too bad, you'll have to look for the next one. So anyway, thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye.